Let's begin. Today's session is Spot Color Deep Dive in Fiery proServer and Fiery XF. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today, Carrie Maloney, Field and Channel Marketing Manager for Fiery Wide Format, and John Nates, Worldwide Technical Product Training Manager for Fiery Wide Format. So with that, let's get going. Carrie, please take it away.
So thank you, Yael. Today's session is a deep dive into the spot color capabilities of Fiery proServer and Fiery XF. Spot colors are key components of corporate identities and brands, so choosing the best possible match, regardless of your printer or substrate, is a must. So today we'll cover working with Pantone, Toyo, DIC and HKS matching systems. We'll cover modifying existing spot colors, adding custom spot colors, and building custom spot color libraries. Plus, how to evaluate spot color accuracy and how to use EFI's Dynamic Wedge to improve spot color reproduction. Before John dives into the details, we'd like to get out to know our audience a little better. So we'd like to take a quick poll. You should now see 2 questions on your screen. You can choose more than one answer for the first question. Whilst you're completing these, I'd like to take the opportunity to remind you that all attendees of this live webinar will receive a time-limited discount code for use on Pantone.com in the follow-up email to this session. Okay, thank you for completing the poll. I'll now hand you over to John for a Spot Colors deep dive.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Thanks, y'all, and thanks everyone for joining us today. What I'll be covering today on this webinar on spot colors in Fiery proServer and Fiery XF, we're going to take a look at the EFI Color Editor, the overview and setting the preferences. The Color Editor is a program that is unlocked when you have a license for the spot color option in Fiery XF. This is almost always a built-in feature if you have a Fiery proServer, and it's a feature that can be added if you don't already have it to Fiery XF. We're going to take a look at building custom spot color tables, adding your own custom spot colors to an existing table so that you can use those. We're going to look at how to evaluate the accuracy of spot colors and how to optimize and or manually modify them if we feel, well, they're just not quite close enough. Once we get all this done, we're going to take a look at how we set the defaults within the Fiery program so that we can have the system automatically take advantage of all of our settings so that it uses exactly the preferences and the color table that we want to use. We'll also take a look at using the Dynamic Wedge. Now, the Dynamic Wedge is exclusive to Fiery proServer and Fiery XF. It is exclusive in the industry, and what it allows us to do is actually monitor the accuracy of spot colors on a job-by-job basis. So we'll give that a look. But first of all, well, why spot colors? Why are spot colors important? Why do we care about spot colors? Well, the nice thing about spot colors is that we have a reference. Okay? I remember back in the days as a commercial photographer, and we would call up the client and say, we got your product, what kind of a background did you want us to put it on? And they'd say, well, something nice. Well, nice doesn't really define it for us, does it? However, if you have a color that you want to reproduce and you can specify it out of one of the libraries, using one of the books from the spot color manufacturers, well, then we're all on the same page. We know exactly what color we're supposed to match. Also, it's important for brand identity. If the Coca-Cola logo, if you suddenly saw that in green, or the McDonald's arches in purple, or the EFI logo in green, well, it just wouldn't look right, okay? We associate companies to their specific colors, and that means these companies are going to want us to reproduce these colors as accurately as possible. Well, EFI has a number of solutions in the Fiery proServer and Fiery XF. First of all, there's a built-in capability. This happens whether or not you have the spot color option, and that is we support the industry standard libraries, the libraries from the various manufacturers. This is one reason why it's important to keep your system up to date, because as you know, the manufacturers are constantly updating their color tables. I saw an ad from Pantone that came into my mailbox, I think in the past week, listing the new spring colors that they have come out with. Well, what we strive for at EFI is whenever we do an update, we try to get the latest and greatest spot color tables from the various manufacturers into the program. So keep your system up to date, and you'll also have access to these. As I said, you can also add the spot color option. With the spot color option, you get the EFI Color Editor. This is a program that allows you to modify the standard colors. Without this program, we use what the manufacturers send us for the reference values, okay? But with the color editor, you could actually modify them, maybe because you're printing on a different substrate, okay? We can also add custom colors. We can evaluate the spot color accuracy and, in many instances, improve the spot color accuracy, whether it's because we measured in a spectrophotometer or we looked at it and the client wanted that color changed a little bit. Now, built into Fiery proServer and Fiery XF is support for a number of spot color channels. If you're using the CPSI, that is the PostScript version of the RIP, we will support a maximum of 127 spot colors. Now, to be clear, these are named spot colors, like Pantone 123, HKS 456, the actual name of the spot colors. Spot colors ideally are defined as LAB values, and if you actually used LAB values for your spot colors, well, there's an unlimited number of those values that we support. But if you have named spot colors, which is the most common way of specifying a spot color by our customers, then with the PostScript RIP, we will support 127 spot colors, and with the APPE, the PDF RIP, these are both from Adobe, we will support a maximum of 27 colors. To be honest, if you have to have more than 27 spot colors in any one particular image, well, we may need to chat offline because that's an awful lot of spot colors. Okay. Which spot colors we support? Well, we support spot colors from various manufacturers, from Pantone, from Toyo, from DIC, and from HKS. These all come standard built into Fiery system. So again, a reason to keep updated is to get the latest, greatest libraries built in. With the spot color option, you will get the color editor. So what does the color editor bring to the party? Well, there are a number of ways to launch it. First of all, if you take a look, you can launch from the Job Explorer or here from the System Manager. That means anyone can launch it, no matter really what their level of use is, whether they're an administrator or a user within Fiery, they can launch the color editor. If you take a look at the top toolbar, and this second last little icon, that is the icon for the color editor. I always thought it looked like a pencil with an eraser, but it's supposed to look like a swatch book that's fanned out. Okay? And if you click on that, it will launch the color editor. Now, if your icon is grayed out, as you can see here, that means one of two things. One, it's already launched. So take a look and see it's maybe already launched. Just click on the icon on the tool tray and bring up the color editor. But it also may mean that you don't have a license for the color editor. And if that is the situation, if the icon is grayed out, and it's not because it's launched, contact your EFI dealer and check into purchasing a license for the color editor. Along the top of the screen in both the System Manager and Job Explorer, there is the Tools menu. And under the Tools menu, we have the Color Editor text that we can click on to launch, or the F4 key on your Mac or Windows system. Any of these will launch the Color Editor in the same way. This is the Color Editor interface. Okay? It has a number of components or bits and pieces. On the left is the list of the various libraries. Now, a lot of people call the spot color the spot color file that gets saved that you would select within your Fiery system to use, they call that the library. Truth be told, it's a number of libraries. It is the library from Pantone, DIC, Toyo, HKS, your custom spot colors that you might have added, colors specific to the printer you're using, for instance, white ink, clear ink. These are all individual libraries. They are part of what we call the spot color table. So where people say, oh, it's the spot color library, in our world it's actually the spot color table, which is a combination of all of these libraries. And they're all listed on the left, anything you have access to. On the right is the color definition area. Once a color is selected, here we've got Pantone Rhodamine Red selected, we can see what the definition is. In this case, the LAB value. Any of you unfamiliar with LAB, last year we ran a series of webinars on fundamentals of color management and standards and specifications. Take a look at those where we explain what LAB is. But in a nutshell, LAB means what is the color supposed to look like to the human eye. And I'm going to show you later why we really want ideally to have our colors specified as LAB values. Okay? But they can be modified here. They can be changed. And we can also modify characterization, gradation. I'll get to these in just a little bit. Now, along the top, we have a little toolbar where we can load an individual color table, save a color table, search for specific spot color names, and get into the preferences. We're going to look at the preferences in just a moment. Along the bottom, there's another toolbar for adding and deleting custom spot colors. Custom spot colors only can be deleted from the spot color table. You cannot delete, for instance, well, there's a number of spot colors in the Pantone library that we don't use, so let's delete them. Nope, you can't delete those. Those are always part of the library. You will always have available all of the current spot color libraries when you select any color table, whether it's the default or a custom table within your Fiery system. Okay, there's also a couple of other icons here. Duplicate, check the gamut, convert, and optimize. We're going to get to those in a moment. Those are some of the really special features that can really help you improve the accuracy of the spot colors. But first, let's take a look at the preferences. If we click on that icon, we get into the preferences area. And the first is, regarding the color definition, the overprint settings. Now, what exactly is overprint? Well, overprint has to do with what happens when one spot color is on top of another spot color, or a spot color is on top of process work. Let me explain. If we have this yellow circle, and I overprint it in my design with cyan, there's no overlap here, really. Okay, I've actually gotten rid of any of the yellow ink in this area. This is what's called a knockout. Well, that's a lot easier to print. However, what happens if it's set to overprint? Overprint means those two inks should be blended. The question is, what color should the overlap area be? Okay, it could be, well, kind of a light area, light green. Well, maybe it's a darker green. Maybe it's even lighter yet, or maybe it's somewhere in the middle. We have various ways of defining what color that overlap area should be, and that is in the preferences in the overprint settings. Now, first we have ink overprint characteristics, 95%. This refers to kind of simulating how ink on a standard printing press works. There's something called wet trap. And what wet trap is if you lay down one ink, and then that sheet of paper continues on through the press, and all of a sudden it gets to the next blanket or the next cylinder, and additional ink comes down. Now, some of that ink may come down on dry paper, but some of that ink may come down on already deposited ink. And if that ink is wet, the question is, how efficient is that wet ink in pulling the new ink off of the cylinder, kind of on top of itself, getting that overprint? 95% efficiency is the default, so you can play with this and modify the lightness or darkness globally. It's a subtle little difference, okay, but it's something you can play with. We also have gamma. Gamma impacts tints of spot colors. Okay? The gamma is think of it as a contrast curve. And as you modify this, you will change the density of colors as they overlap because the tints will be lighter or darker. Okay? So this is a kind of a global curve to modify that for overprints. Okay? Only for overprints. Probably the most important area, however, is this, the method that we're going to use. And here we have a whole list of what are called chromatic adaptation transforms, or CATs. And we have a list of these, CATs, BSPC, CAT02, PrimeCat, ROMCat, SharpCat, all different chromatic adaptation transforms. And what that is it's basically very, very simple math. Math like this, okay? Aren't you glad you don't have to actually key this all in when you want to set your overprints? But scientists have gone through and tried to figure out how the eye works, how inks work, how light works, and come up with all sorts of formulas, algorithms, to define what happens when different colors of light mix, different colors of ink mix, and how the eye sees them. So we have within our Fiery system a number of these to choose from. Here's the bad news. They don't refer to any specific method of printing. So you can't say, well, I want to simulate my ink on my press, and it's heat set, or it's cold set, or it's UV, or I want to simulate on my Epson what my ViewTech is going to look like with its UV ink. That's not what these refer to. They're really just theories. They're really just theories. And they can make quite an impact on the overprints, and not just for solids. Now take a look here. We've got 3 different prints that were printed with 3 different chromatic adaptation transforms, 3 different cats: Bradford, Cat 2000, and CMYK edition. Now look at the lightest area here, or the darkest area. Here, the overlap is actually a little lighter than the green. Here, it's a lot lighter. Well, here it's darker. Well, how about the other end of the spectrum when we're overprinting 20% yellow with our spot color green? Well, there's a slight difference there. It's a little darker. Well, you know, there's not a lot of difference there, although here it looks a little yellower. Well, what about the midtones? What about the 60%? Well, this is actually kind of a brown. This is much lighter, and this is actually darker, but still has the green cast. Okay? So it's not a simple answer to the question of which cat should we select. Here's what I recommend. Build yourself a table. I built this. I actually got a file much like this from a customer of ours, and he gave me permission to modify it, and I changed it. Now, this is solids over other solids and solids over process work. Okay? 2 important things. This file must be saved with Overprint turned on in the file itself in order for your Fiery system to honor it. So we actually want to see this. Now notice here, I've got one color that is not set to overprint, so that's going to knock out. That's going to be solid. I've actually got the same thing in a couple of other spots here. So you want to be careful that the file is created correctly, and if you also use tints, you're going to want to add some tint samples to that. So you build a file such as the file I've had here. Then you go into the Color Editor Preferences and you select one of the chromatic adaptation tables you want to work with. Maybe you set some of the other options, okay? And then you save the results. You save the results, and then you save the file. Okay, so it's kind of a 2-step save process. Once you save this, you give it a name, and on the spot color pane within XF, we'll look at that a little later, you will select that spot color table. So I recommend giving it a name of the chromatic adaptation transform. So ROMCat, save one as SharpCat, and then image your sample file and really take a look at it and decide which looks correct. That's the method to select the correct chromatic adaptation table. Now, I do want to mention that the default, do test the default, because the default is actually a blending of 2 chromatic adaptation tables together. We worked with some of our largest clients, some of our packaging clients that use a lot of spot colors and spot color overprints. And we worked with them to blend 2 different chromatic adaptation transforms together to come up with what our default is. And they're very happy with the results. So start with default, and maybe you'll be lucky, and that's exactly what you're going to want to see. In addition, we have overprint brightness of similar colors. Now, this is, again, fine-tuning. Gamma is fine-tuning. Overprint characteristics is fine-tuning. This is kind of a course correction. Overprint brightness is another fine-tuning area. You've got 3 choices: normal, which means really don't make any additional change. But then we've got slightly brightened and strongly brightened. This will only affect colors really in the same family. So if you print yellow over orange, slightly brightened, the overprint area will get a little lighter. Strongly brightened will get a little more saturated, a little more light. If you select a color where you've done yellow over blue, no difference, because those are complementary colors. So they're not going to have any change to them because of this option. So again, it's just a fine-tuning area. So you've got a lot of options there for overprint. Now, white point settings. Spot colors can also be impacted by the color of the stock they're printed on, and sometimes we simulate the color of the stock when we print, when we're making a proof. This would normally not be something you would set for production printing. But in proofing, you can either select media independent, in which case it's going to do the math in the background, your fiery system, and come up with the correct white point simulation under your spot colors based on the reference profile. Well, you can also hardwire in a white point that you want to use. Okay? You could even measure in the white point of the media you're trying to use. So again, a way to fine-tune that little overprint. Probably more important if you're printing on a very heavily colored stock. Last on the color definitions preferences area, we have Gamut check settings. You're going to see later that we can check the accuracy of our spot colors without even printing them. We can estimate how accurate the color is going to be, and they'll be color-coded. Well, color coding is set based on what tolerance we have for delta E. If you're unsure what delta E is, again, refer to last year's webinars. I explain it in great detail. Also, the delta E format. Delta E 2000 is the current delta E format that many of us recommend. The delta E format is the math that gives us the numerical value for how close the color is. And the newer versions of this, and 2000 is the newest, try to mimic how the eye truly sees color. The old versions, they really didn't do that good of a job. You could have a huge delta E in yellows and not actually see it. Well, they keep coming up with new formulas to try to get a better match to what the eye sees. All right, we have two other tabs in the preferences. The first is the measurement device. If we're going to measure in a sample color, what device do we use? We currently support the ES2000, ES1000, or the i1 Pro, the i1 Pro 2. And you can set the settings for the M1, M0, M2 characteristics. Again, last year's webinars if you're unsure what all that means. You can also select the light conditions. Normally D52 degrees is the standard for our industry. Monitor profile. Fiery is not a soft proofing system. It was never meant to be. Maybe someday in the future it will be, but right now it is not. And if your monitor is way far off, you could calibrate and profile it and then select that custom profile. Otherwise, we'll use whatever the system monitor profile is for your system. Now, last we have gradation, and gradation is where you can adjust a curve. Some people call this a TVI, a tone value increase curve, or a dot gain curve. This will only affect tints of spot colors, okay? Not overprints, but any tint. And what we've got here is I've taken about a 40%, 45% tint up to about a 60%. So there's going to be an increase in that. What that means is this will have no effect on solids. Let's be honest, most people specify their spot color by going and they find the color they want and they specify it as 100%. Okay? They don't say, you know, I think an 82% tint of Pantone 487 is going to be exactly what I want. They go find the color they want. However, if they're doing gradations and tints, that's where this really comes into play. Okay? So that is the settings of the preferences that we can have in our color editor. Now, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A window that we have set up. And at the end, we'll hopefully have some time, as long as I don't get too long-winded, of which I'm often guilty of, and get to hopefully any of the questions that you have for us. At this moment, Carrie, do we have the poll results?
We do, John. I'll put them on screen now for you.
All right. Well, it looks like Pantone is going to be fairly happy today. A little bit with HKS and some Toyo. Some other of our attendees use custom colors, and kind of anywhere from a few to almost all, kind of an equal distribution there of the spot color usage. So it looks like, oddly enough, everybody that's attending here is interested in spot color. So that's a good thing. Thank you very much for responding to our poll. Now, we have customers that say, well, you know, the custom or the regular libraries are great, but we want to also add our custom colors. Now, sometimes it's a custom color added just because it's a name that they want to use, but it actually is one of the colors out of the library. So there are different ways of adding these, and they can be added either manually or by measurement. If we look at that bottom toolbar, our first icon is the Add. This will be to add a new custom color. And if you click on that, we've got an area where the color appears. It starts as just a pure white color. Then we can give it a name. The name must be exact, okay? The exact color as it's going to appear in the file. So my blue with a space with uppercase M, uppercase B has to be spelled that way if that's how it's going to appear in the file. Okay? This comes back also to a lot of people over the years have entered kind of shorthand. There was a lot of people in the past used the abbreviation for Pantone Matching System, the PMS. Okay? Those will not be recognized. You must use the full legal name of the spot color in order for it to be recognized within the Fiery system. And last, we have our area where we can designate the color that we want to, or the color model that we're going to use to enter. Okay? Now, we can use LAB, or for those of you that may be a little used to building your colors in Photoshop or Illustrator in the LCH, Luminance Chroma Hue, we support that model also. Colors added this way are listed as independent, and this is very important. What happens within the Fiery system is if you have your color specified as LAB or LCH, you're telling the system this is what it's supposed to look like. And your Fiery system will then come up with a new recipe based on the inks that are available on your output device, based on the media you are using and the calibration file, and come up with a recipe specific for that combination. That might mean on two different devices, maybe two Epsons, one right after the other off the assembly line, well, they're going to be a little different. Two batches of media, well, maybe a different serial number on the rolls of media, but the same media, and a different batch of ink, well, those two printers print slightly different. But if you have a custom calibration file for each, Fiery will automatically come up with the best recipe for each of those two printers. And that's why it's called independent. The color you get is independent of all that other stuff, the printer, the ink, the media, etc. Very, very useful to specify your colors in that way. Well, a lot of people go, well, I've got a color here. How on earth do I come up with an LAB value? Well, you can also click the little measure icon here and then use a handheld set from your preferences, in this case the ES2000, and measure the color patch. And then it will appear and you'll have your starting LAB values. Now, if you have trouble editing an LAB, there's ways to change that also. But again, I do recommend, if possible, doing LAB. Again, that's the independent way of specifying, but we also have dependent. Dependent, when you specify CMYK, or notice, the specific printer that I selected also has violeting, so I can use violeting. Hey, maybe kind of useful if I'm trying to print a violet color. So we would support that, and some people find it easier to edit those colors. Well, gosh, if I measured, how do I get these color specifications that I can work with? Because I don't know how to edit that. I know how to edit this. I don't know how to get this. Well, back to our toolbar, there is a convert icon. And if you select convert with whatever colors are selected, you tell it which printer and which media you're printed on, and then it will select the correct calibration file and the ink set. It will automatically come up with those values. Now you know where to start with, because it's telling you this is what I'm going to send to the printer. Well, now I've got this custom color specified as LAB and CMYK. Keep this in the back of your mind for a moment, because later on when we look at the defaults within a workflow, this is going to become very, very important. Okay? As is source or printer. Okay? What on earth does that mean? Well, if we're processing spot colors in a normal workflow, we have our reference profile. Maybe this is Fogra 51 or Grackle. We've got our media profile, our ViewTech running gloss banner. Then we have the calibration file, and finally our output device itself. Okay? Well, here is the color that I want to print. It's that purple from our interface. If it's specified as LAB, that color specification is sent directly to the media profile, which means as we change the media profile or the calibration file, XF will automatically come up with our new recipe and try to make it as close to that color on every single output device, every single media we print. However, what if I specify it as the CMYK value? If I select source as the option, and this is specific to each custom color you add, this is not a global setting. If I select source, it treats this color as if it were a pixel in an image, and it looks at the reference profile. It says, hey, reference profile, if I printed this on a press being printed to FOGRA or ISO or some kind of other standard, what would it look like? Make it look like that on my output device. What that means is if I specify it as LAB and change the reference profile, I'll have no change in the output. But if I specify it as CMYK source and change the reference profile, that color will be greatly impacted. Imagine if I switched from like a FOGRA 51 or a Grackle profile and switched to newsprint. That color is going to look radically different on newsprint, and it would look radically different on my output device. Okay? I can also select printer. If I select printer for that color, the CMYK plus additional color spec will be sent directly to the calibration file. It will bypass all of the ICC profiles. This is really a good way to really fine-tune that color, because you're specifying exactly as close as you can the information that's getting sent directly to the print heads. Okay, it also kind of helps you know what the capability of the output device is. Let's say you printed this and you looked at it and said, you know, it just looks a little yellow. I'm just going to go into the spec and pull a little yellow out of it. So we go in, let's see, cyan, magenta, yellow. Yellow is at 0. I'm not sending any yellow to the print heads. So, you know, you can't pull out yellow. Well, that means you're going to have to add a little more cyan and magenta, or maybe add a little more purple to it. So it can also help in letting you know what the capability of the output device is. So we have a number of different ways of specifying this color. Again, if you're interested in just absolute accuracy, and hey, most of us are, by all means, if possible, specify or measure your color in and get the LAB values. All right, so we've done this and we've printed our color. How good is it? Well, a lot of that depends upon the gamut of your output device and the ink and the media that's used on it. Again, last year's webinars cover gamut, but in a nutshell, gamut is how much color can your output device create. Let's say you took an inkjet printer and removed yellow ink. That greatly reduced the gamut, because not only can it now not print any yellows, it likely can't print any oranges or greens or many other colors. So we want as big a gamut as we can, but we don't have the ideal gamut. The ideal gamut would be what our eye sees, and we are certainly far away from that on many of our output devices. So how do we know if any of these colors are within gamut? Well, we can shift-click and select a number of colors, or we can control and pick and choose which colors we want to take a look at. And then we click the little icon right there, the gamut check icon. Our Fiery system will prompt us to, well, okay, what gamut? What printer? What calibration file? What output device? What media are we running? And here it shows us that 100% of those colors that I selected are in gamut. The average delta is 1.68 and the maximum is 3.66. Now, I set my system to actually have a gamut threshold of 2.25 just to show you the color coding here. But the color coding is if we're under 2.25 delta E per color, that means they'll show up in green. And if it's above 2.25, then they show up in red. Hopefully you don't have customers that expect every single spot color to be less than 2.25 delta E. The default is 5, and that seems to be a pretty good setting for most situations. But it's a nice way of testing these colors and giving you an idea prior to actually printing the color. Okay? Okay, well, our spot colors are maybe a little high. Is there a way to improve them? Yes, there is. We have a feature called Spot Color Optimization. And in Spot Color Optimization, it's that last little icon down here. Again, we select a series with the Shift key or Control key, pick and choose a number of colors, and then we click the little button. Once again, what device are we going to measure with? It defaults to whatever we set in our preferences. what printer, what stock am I printing on, and on the fly, Fiery will create a color target containing these spot colors. Now, it actually sends the LAB values. It doesn't send the named spot colors. So we don't have that limit of 27 spot colors if we're sending them to our Fiery system. So you can select as many colors as you want. However, I'll warn you, the way the system works in the background is once it prints this file and you measure, you will create what's called a spot color optimization file. And a lot of people think that if you, let's say you picked spot color that's middle gray, just an absolute middle gray, and it's a Pantone color. We modify LAB values. We're not modifying the names. We're not modifying the definition of the name. We're making a correction to the LAB specification. That means there's likely a middle gray Toyo and DIC and HKS color. And if there is, those colors are also optimized and modified. Also, any colors close to that middle gray will also be optimized. The farther away a color is, the less they will be impacted. But we will affect all colors. So don't think you've got to select all the colors because, let's face it, we have 37 colors roughly in our spot color table for all of the libraries. That's a whole lot of measurement. Okay, so likely you're not going to want to do that. Okay, so we've got it modified and it's maybe accurate, but what if it's still unacceptable? Well, we can edit the definition. Now here I've got rhodamine red, and let's say my customer said I want rhodamine red, but they actually surround it with some other color, and because of the way our eye works, they don't like the way it looks surrounded by that color. Oh, we can measure it and show it's got a very low delta E and prove it's very accurate, and the customer says, well, I still don't like it. It's got to be changed. So all we have to do is modify the, wait a minute, it says all grayed out. How come it's grayed out? Well, by licensing, we are prohibited from modifying any of the internal colors. These are the color specifications from the spot color vendors, manufacturers, Pantone, DIC, HKS, Toyo. We cannot modify those directly. However, if you select the duplicate icon at the bottom, it will duplicate this color in your custom spot color area, and it will pick up the LAB value, and look, now this is available. Now I can measure it. Okay? I could also, if I wanted to, click the convert and see what CMYK values it's going to send to that specific printer. And then I could start modifying these values if I wanted to. Now I can also add tints. Okay? If I go to the Characterization tab, I can add a tint. This, again, is more important likely for our packaging customers that are making proofs, especially if they're proofing to simulate a colored stock. The lighter a tint, the more impact the colored stock is going to have on changing the way that color looks. Now, it's possible even to measure in those tints. And I'll be honest, we have customers that use nothing but their own specialty colors. They're large corporations, often cosmetic or food companies, and they have their own custom spot color library. I know of a customer down in Chicago that deals with these libraries, and they actually printed on press, on stock, tints in 10% increments of several hundred spot colors and manually measured them in to a tint table here in the characterization in their custom spot color because they wanted to make sure that these tints were absolutely as accurate as they possibly could be. And that tells you three things. Number one, they have a very important customer because that's a lot of work. And two, they have some type of handheld spectro. It would either be an ES1000 or ideally an ES2000. And hopefully unpaid interns because that's pretty much an entire summer's worth of work. And boy, nothing I'd want to have to tackle, but it is certainly possible. We could also set a gradation. Okay, quick quiz. What is this going to affect? What is this going to impact? Okay, any of you that said tints only are correct. This would not affect solids. Gee, does this curve look familiar? Well, it's the same curve as I set from the gradation pane in the preferences panel. This is very important. These curves are cumulative. So I have set this curve on my duplicate of Pantone Rhodamine Red. Right now, that's the only color that will be impacted by this curve, but because I set this as a global curve, this curve would really be doubled. So my 45% going up to 60 would likely go up to maybe 75%. All the other colors would only be affected by my global change. So you have a lot of capability of fine-tuning any tint reproduction within your system, either globally or on a per-color basis. Now, you don't have to do all of this change right within the color editor. You can actually make changes within the Job Explorer on a per-job basis. You see here, I've imported a job. It has CMYK and it has Pantone 185, a nice bright red color. Well, maybe the customer messed up. I had heard a rumor once that there was a customer that on one job once messed up the artwork and it had to be fixed later. Never experienced it myself, but if you do run into that, got a drop-down list here. We've got the list of Pantone colors and the source. First, let's look at the list of Pantone colors since that's what's been specified. Well, if I click on that, I can select any color available in my spot color table. In this case, I'll change Pantone 185 to 660 coded and change it to a blue color instead. I could also click on the source and select an entirely different way of specifying the color. I could select LAB, I could select in this case CMYK and specify exactly what I want to send. Now, a little tip or trick, on that drop-down list you'll see inkjet. And if you select inkjet, XF will automatically look at the profile set for your printer and show you the CMYK and or CMYK additional colors that it's going to send to the printer. So again, a quick way of maybe getting your starting point of how you want to measure. Okay, so how do we set a default so that all this stuff just ideally works? We want to make this as transparent as possible to our users. Well, first, we want to take a look on our File panel with our workflow selected, the PS-EPS PDF, PostScript EPS PDF pane. And if we take a look at that, there's an area in RIP separation. Okay? We have three options there. One other area that's important is, I've got it kind of hidden here by my highlight box, but simulate overprint in composite jobs. If you do print overprints, remember back a number of slides we took a look at what overprints look like. You have to have overprint turned on in the file. You also have to have overprint turned on within your Fiery system. Otherwise, if this is turned off, it'll all be knockout. Okay? If you don't print overprints, you don't have to worry about this. But in RIP separation, how does this work? Well, we have three options. The first is enable. And if we select enable, we're telling Fiery to go look at the color tables and go look at the libraries and try to find the Pantone color that's been specified. In this case, 1505 coded. And then look at the LAB value and come up with the correct formula that will give us the best match on that output device using that ink and that media. So this would be this is our default, and this would be my default. It's try to make it look as accurate as possible. Sometimes in a proofing situation, however, we don't want it accurate to the library. We want it accurate to how will that appear if it's printed on a 4-color press. I'm not using a specialty ink on my press. Well, then we can select Disable, and what Disable does is it looks at the CMYK values for that color and uses the CMYK values instead of the LAB values and tries to make it look like it will printed on a 4-color press. Okay? Kind of a way to limit the gamut or dumb down the color, try to match it to the capability of a device that doesn't have the capability that maybe our inkjet printer does. Okay? So that is disable. The last is force. Force, again, is going to try to get all spot colors to look accurate, but it's also handy if we are printing PostScript files. That happens, it's getting more and more scarce that you see PostScript files. Most people are switching over to a PDF workflow. PostScript files are kind of odd little beasties, and the header of the file can contain a lot of information, and it can cause problems in pretty much everybody's RIP. There can be special things that we have to add in order to make sure that the PostScript information in the header is correctly understood, such as the page size. Well, also, color definitions can cause a problem in a PostScript file. So if we select force, will help ensure that the spot color definitions in the PostScript file are honored. We also often use it if there's white or silver as specialty spot colors that correspond to actual inks on our output device. So if I have an output device that has white ink or clear ink or silver ink, if you find that your system is not recognizing those colors, and you'll know it's not recognized by taking a look at that spot color pane with a job selected, and you only see CMYK, you don't see CMYK clear or CMYK white, switch to force in that workflow, re-import the file, and that should fix the problem. Okay, now we switch over to the spot color pane. We have a number of options here. First is input handling. Our options are automatic, which is the default, force CMYK, force multicolor. Spot colors can sometimes masquerade as process. Pantone has a system called hexachrome, which is CMYK orange-green. So a job comes in that's CMYK orange-green. Is that hexachrome CMYK orange-green, which means someone actually separated files using those two colors, or is it four-color process with two spot colors that happen to be called orange and green? Well, if that's the case, you can select whether you want to force CMYK for the job or force multicolor. Which ICC profile do you want it to use? If the names of the channels in the file match exactly the names of the channels in the ICC profile you have set for the multicolor profile, this should happen automatically, and you can just leave it at the automatic default setting. Okay. Next, we have spot color libraries. This might be a special library because you've added custom colors, or it might be this testing for these chromatic adaptation transforms that you've run, where you're trying to discover which spot color overprint settings to use. You simply select that spot color library here. Again, this can be globally for a workflow, or this could be on a per job basis. Next, we have search priority. Okay, search priority has 4 drop-downs, and they all have the same options: none, internal, LAB, CMYK, and source. And you can select one for each of these drop-downs. So you're kind of setting the order XF is going to look in. Well, what does this mean? Take a look back in our color editor, and you can see that I have Pantone 185 coded a bright red as part of the internal library. So that's a default. Can't change that. But if I duplicate it, and now it's in my custom, I can set it as in a completely different LAB value and specify it as a green, or a completely different CMYK value and set it as a blue. Now, obviously, I would never have one color with 3 specifications that were so widely apart in their color, but maybe it's a red with a little more yellow added to it, or a green with a little more blue added to it. Just we're making a subtle change. So I've got this color, really the same name, 3 different ways in my system. Okay, so here is my search priority, and CMYK is first. So if a job comes in that has Pantone 185 coded as a spot color, and it's recognized as a spot color, let's see, CMYK, it's going to print as blue. It's going to use this definition. If instead I selected LAB first, it would print it as green. If internal was the first item on the list, it would use the default red color from Pantone. Okay? Now my last option is source file, and that's, if all else fails, Tony brought in a job and had Tony's red specified, but the file isn't created correctly and we can't recognize what the spot color definition is in the job. Tony never, we don't have it in our library, so he didn't tell us, but maybe there is something actually in that file that is artist created. And in there is the definition, and the source file setting can sometimes pull it out of there. By the way, if you set these all at none, you're making Fiery XF into a police officer saying, we don't want to print spot colors through this particular workflow. And if that happens, you set those all to none, and you've turned off all the libraries, all the tables, and that means any job that comes in with a spot color will fail and warn you unknown spot color, and you can say, hey, how come you're sending how come you're sending files with spot colors through a workflow that we have set that we're going to use on our 4-color press that has no spot color capability? Now, instead of that, you could also select an unknown spot color warning color. What would happen here is if that unknown spot color came in, instead of setting all of these as none and erroring the job, it would print but it would print with whatever color you specify. I actually don't recommend doing this because imagine what happens. You just printed a job and it came out with this big area that's orange. Well, now you have to think to yourself, is it supposed to be orange, or was it an unknown spot color that Fiery automatically swapped out? So then you have to go and take apart the file and take a look at it and see if there was an error in the file, and if there was, you have to fix the file or send it back to your client and have them fix it and resubmit it and reprint it. And it's all that time and materials, especially if you made large output on, say, a grand format printer. So turning that off, just warning you, takes out all the time and materials and just simply leaves you with the same issue. You have to fix the file and print it correctly. So I recommend having this turned off and maybe setting these for none if you want to catch files that have spot colors that you don't want to use. All right, the Dynamic Wedge, a way to check on a per-job basis how we did. If we go to the verification pane, for Control Strip 1, you can select the Dynamic Wedge. You set the device you want to use, whether you want to monitor only process, only spot, or process and spot, and how many patches you want to use for this color bar, 16, 32, 8. You set that. You can also set in Gamut colors only. That would only show then colors, spot colors that are in Gamut. A little dangerous because if you don't check that and you don't see colors, therefore it doesn't call to your attention that that color is wrong, be a little careful about using that. But once that's set up, if you bring in a job, the following happens. Here's a standard wedge. This is the ID Alliance wedge. Let's see, where is this light pink here? Well, it doesn't exist. How about this, all these blues? Well, there's no blues on this image, and this is what you find. A lot of the standard colors really don't reference this image at all. The Dynamic Wedge, if we have it set for process and spot, first it will put down any spot colors, and it takes the color of my Fiery logo, and it adds that as a separate color patch that I can measure. And then it looks at the most common colors within an image, and it dynamically, on the fly, builds a color bar to take up the rest of the spots with those colors. So we're actually monitoring the colors within the job itself, and, in my opinion, even more importantly, the spot colors. Once they are measured, it'll show you what the spot colors are, what the actual CMYK values that were sent out. It can show us if any of them are out of Gamut or not, okay, if you have that checked. And then we can measure and we can get average and peak delta E values for the spot colors. And we can see here for this job, my average is 1.33, my peak is 4.3, my tolerance is 3 and 6. Hey, I think my client should be pretty happy with all of these. If my client is not, at the bottom here we have our Optimize button, and if we click on that, we will optimize the colors in this wedge, and Fiery will, within the capability of the output device, remember we're always dealing with the gamut of the output device, try to get the accuracy improved even a little more. Now, as you've seen, we have a lot of features available for you in your Fiery proServer or Fiery XS system to help with spot colors. Although this was a deep dive, there is still even more. And what we've done is we've started to put together an online course on spot colors. It's in our Fiery Global University, and it's the first course in an entire program on Fiery proServer and Fiery XF. So over the next, I'm not sure, year, 2 years, we're going to put a ton of content up there that you can access to learn more about your system. To begin with, we've started with spot colors, okay, a course in spot colors. We're going to send you a link, and if you click on that supplied link, you come to this screen automatically, and it will enter the key to unlock the spot color program. We've just started building this. It is a work in progress. If you already have registered on the Fiery Global University, you can enter your login information. Otherwise, you can just fill in the information and register and then enroll. And once you're enrolled, you'll come to this panel. And you can click on My Courses. If you click on My Courses, you will see courses for Fiery XF6. Maybe you've got some other courses for the Fiery cut sheet side, etc. If you click on that, you'll see right now we only have the spot colors in Fiery proServer and Fiery XF course available. Again, we're going to add more courses as we go, but we're still building this course, but you can start watching it right away. If you click on that, you'll see what we have available. And we've got a welcome and a course overview, how to launch the color editor, the different the different methods of launching and why one is maybe better than the other. The Color Editor overview and preferences are coming up next. We actually went on and did Chapter 9 because there's a lot of requests for setting all the defaults. The PS-EPS options, the input handling, search priority, all of those. At the bottom of each chapter, there's a little test your knowledge, just 2-3 little quiz questions that you can go through to make sure that you understand the material, and if not, you can go back and take it again. Eventually, when you finish everything, as you launch and view each session or take each quiz, this will turn green, so you know exactly where you are when you come back. There will be a final course evaluation that you can take to see how you did overall and how your memory retention is. But we are striving to add even more information for you to help you understand how everything works in Fiery, and specifically now starting with our most often asked topic, spot colors. So please take advantage of that. Go register, log in, and start taking a look. And let us know what you think of this information. We would be very happy to hear because we want to improve it for you, our customers, to make better use of our products. Carrie, back to you.
Okay, thank you, John, for that excellent overview. So to summarize some of the key things that we learned today, we learned how easy it is to add, modify, and manage your spot colors for the best possible results across multiple medias and printers. We also learned that spot color characteristics such as gradation and overprint behavior need to be considered and controlled if you use tints of spot colors or require them to overprint correctly. Plus how to use the Dynamic Wedge and that it can really help you evaluate and improve spot color reproduction. So we have 3 more Learn More opportunities for you. First, we have the color management settings tech note that John mentioned during his presentation for a complete overview of all the settings that affect color in Fiery XF and Fiery proServer. We also have some Pantone Color Institute articles, which are a collection of brief technical articles covering common subjects. And we also have another World of Fiery webinar that some of you might find useful. So this is the ABCs of producing the best match for spot colors. And this session provides basic information on the subject, plus information on spot color controls when using our Fiery digital front ends for toner and cut sheet applications. And this presentation, as usual, contains live links to any resources that we've mentioned. So today was our first wide format session for 2016. Next, on June the 15th, we'll cover a Color Tools overview in Fiery proServer and Fiery XF, where you can learn about all the color tools that are available within these products. And then later on in the year, on October the 19th, we have a session on linearization and profiling in Fiery proServer and Fiery XF. This is a ground-up but detailed session on attaining the best results possible for all your media types. Both of those sessions are now open for registration using the links provided within this presentation.
All right. Okay. So, full hour of great information on spot color, certainly a deep dive. We have some questions. So we are at the top of the hour, but we do want to get to some of our questions from the audience. So we'll take 5 or 10 minutes past the hour to do so. And again, as mentioned at the top, if we didn't get to your question, we'll certainly get back to you with the full Q&A, FAQ, or directly via email addressing your specific question. So John, Carrie, let's get going, see what we can get through.
Okay. So John, how often should I optimize my spot colors is the first question we have.
The optimization procedure, which tries to improve the output on the output media, there's really two answers to that question. One is you would do multiple optimizations, not over different time, but at the same time, for different media combinations, different printer combinations, because of the gamut capabilities of the output device. So even if you have, say, a gloss banner and a matte paper that you are using on the same output device, you might need to optimize for both of those because the characteristics are so different. Now, once you've optimized once per media ink printer combination, as long as you keep the output device in control through calibration, recalibration, etc., you shouldn't need to re-optimize the spot color library once it's built the first time. If the device doesn't drift that much, and our inkjet printers these days tend to be much more stable than they used to be years ago, then you'll find that you likely, maybe rarely, have to do a re-optimization of the spot colors. Next.
So the next question is, can I share spot color libraries with other Fiery users?
Yes, you can save a spot color library. It saves it as a .cxs file, and if you go into, on a Windows machine, in the program data folder, there's, as we usually tend to do at EFI, bury it as deep as possible. But if you go into the program data folder, EFI, Fiery XF, you want to get into the server folder, and you'll find under profiles there's a spot color folder. On a Mac, it's under the application support folder in the main library. These are standalone files. If you do a file save, the default library is actually encrypted. So you may look at it and go, well, that's not a very large library. The only thing you're really saving are preferences and any custom spot colors. It picks up all of the default libraries from Pantone, Toyo, DIC, HKS from the system itself. So you may be surprised that it's not a huge file, but it's really all the additions and changes you've made. If you send that to someone and they drop it into their corresponding folder on their system, ideally restart the system, that library should show up on the drop-down list.
Okay, thank you. Next question is there a maximum number of spot colors I can use in a job?
Yes, on one of the previous slides, you can take a look at that on the, if you do the replay. If it's a PostScript file, it's 127. If it's a PDF file, 27. And these are named colors. So Pantone 123, HKS, ABC. So if you specify LAB values, there's no limit. But if you specify it as the name in a file, then you will need to honor those limits.
Okay, thank you. Next question is there a swatch printing feature in the Fiery XF product?
Funny you should ask. This has been an often asked for option. I know on the Fiery Cut side, the toner side of the world, I believe they've had this feature for quite some time, and we will have that feature soon. If all goes well, we might even have it in the next release that should still be this quarter, where you can select one or a number of spot colors from any of the libraries, and it will print kind of your own little swatch book to show how it's going to appear, again, on that output device with that media, with that ink. So it's a great feature. We're really looking forward to having that finally within the Fiery XF and Fiery proServer family of products. And keep your fingers crossed. If all goes well, you might see that yet this quarter.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, I have a spot color that I want to ignore in my Fiery called Through Cut. How do I do that?
Well, a number of different ways. First of all, you could go in and you could add that as a custom color in the library with 0000 as the specification. And then make sure in the document you set it as overprint, because if you set it as knockout, even if it's set at 0000 as a color, it's still going to knock out the color behind it. And if it overprints an area, you'll see, for instance, let's say it's a dotted line, you'll see a white dotted line left behind. The other option would be within XF itself, when that job comes up, you could simply click on the check mark next to the color on the interface where it appears and really just turn that color off so that it really won't be used. If we take a look here, if I were to uncheck this box and re-preview, then it'll show up as a gray box, and I'll be able to print it without actually printing that color.
Okay, thank you, John. And the next question is, why do some print shops ask for jobs with spot colors set to process?
Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, if they're only printing 4-color on their press, then they want to make sure that you understand that they're not going to be able to hit these colors. If you take a look at the Pantone Bridge book as an example, I always like to say there's the pretty side of the Bridge book, which is the enabled side, and then there's the, well, sometimes not as pretty side because of the gamut limitations of a press on the process side, okay, or in our world, then the disabled side. So they might be wanting to ensure that you understand that, yeah, you're not going to get maybe the color you want, and make sure that you don't set the expectations too high. The other is, like anything, they probably don't want to be responsible for conversions. If you send a process color, they're going to have to convert it to something that they can print. If you do the conversion, it's on your shoulders. So it might be shifting the responsibility. It might be setting expectations.
Okay, thank you, John. I think we have time for one more question,
Okay.
in the interest of people's time. Sometimes spot colors are not printed. They print as black. But when I change the order, they somehow print correctly. So, John, you may have answered that already, but just to cover it once more if you didn't.
Well, yeah, spot colors can be kind of an interesting little beast. One thing I might recommend is on the PostScript EPS PDF tab that we talked about, there is an additional option, and that is, let me just go and show that quickly, but there is an option for which print engine you're going to use. Now, the default is the PostScript engine. It's a little faster, but I would recommend if you're running PDF files, switch that to the PDF engine. It might be a transparency issue. It might be an overprint issue in the file itself. So try that and see if that fixes the issue. Otherwise, you can always supply the file to support, and they can tear it apart and see what's wrong with it. A lot of times it's just specific of what package the file came out of, et cetera, and they could come up with additional recommendations once they see the file. But a lot of times just selecting the PDF engine, if it's a PDF file that's giving you a problem, can solve it.
Okay, so I know that we did not get to all the questions. There are plenty more, but due to time and respecting everyone's time, both our audience and our speakers, we're going to cut it short, but we will compile all questions and answers into an FAQ document and make that available to you along with all the other resources that John and Carrie mentioned during today's presentation. So as we mentioned, we'll be back to you within a few days with links to the recordings and the resources. We look forward to seeing you June 15th during our Color Tools session. That's our next one within the wide format series. And here you can see the two coming up later this year. So if you haven't registered, we encourage you to do so. With that, I want to thank our audience for joining us today, and of course our presenters, John and Carrie, for taking the time to put a great presentation on spot colors for all of us, and we'll see you in a couple of months. Take care.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Appreciate it.